What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 221. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Bonus show for you today. There's just so much going on, particularly with this Russia issue, that I'm going to go ahead and put out at least one extra show this week. So today we got Assange, Russia, Yemen news, a lot of important stuff. Do what you can to support the show. The easiest thing, the best thing you could do is just share the show. Put it out there on your social media feeds, recommend it to people. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, so that's a great, easy place to find the show. There, of course, all the show notes, including, if you really want to help out and donate to the show, the Patreon, Subscribe Star, and crypto information is all in the show notes page. Of course, you could just donate directly to the Libertarian Institute as well. You can also support the show by subscribing and, hitting the like button wherever you're listening to the show. We put the video version on YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey. And then we also have social media pages at Facebook and Twitter. So, following, sharing, all that stuff is a great way to help the show. You can also help the show by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code PEACE. That'll save you 25% off when you spend $75 or more, and it gets the show a kit bag, so it's an absolutely fantastic deal for the show. Paloma Verde has been a great partner of the show for well over a year. Everybody who I know that I've talked to who has used the promo code has enjoyed the products that they got from Paloma Verde, and that's absolutely why I expected, because they had their lab tested results right there on their website. I know the owners, Carlos and Vanessa, are absolutely fantastic people, and they produce absolutely fantastic products. So my personal recommendation is the sports cream. The co-host of the show, Connor Freeman, recommends the soft gels, but they have a great lineup of products there. And if you're new to CBD, an education tab to help you pick the best products for what's going to make you feel the best. So PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. All right, let's get into the show. We're going to start off today with some good news, because we actually do have good news on the show sometimes, and that is the British High Court opens door for Assange to appeal to the UK Supreme Court, and this is from Kevin Gustola at The Dissenter. Of course, Kevin is a previous guest of this show to talk about the Assange issue, as well as other whistleblower issues. But here he writes that Wikileaks founder Julian Assange prevailed in his effort to obtain certification from the British High Court of Justice, which would allow him to appeal their prior decision to the Supreme Court. And so I guess this is like, taking it from an appeals court up to the Supreme Court in the United States. Now, I'm not sure how it works exactly in the US, but apparently in the UK, the High Court actually has to sign off on whether the appeal could be submitted to the Supreme Court, which is what happened. So according to Stella Morris, who of course is Julian Assange's fiance, I don't know if they actually were able to get married, but they've certainly been engaged and everything, says that what happened in court today is precisely what we wanted to happen. The High Court certified that we had raised a point of law of general public importance and that the Supreme Court has grounds to hear this appeal. The situation is now that the Supreme Court has to decide whether to hear the appeal, but make no mistake, we won in court. So at least from Stella Morris, it does sound like, there's some good news here, even though, of course, this does mean that Assange will be embroiled in the UK justice system for an extended period of time, right? Because not only does the Supreme Court, I guess, have to, hear the appeal itself, but they also have to just decide whether to take up the appeal or not. And I believe the decision by the High Court of Justice to allow the extradition of Assange was pretty early in December, maybe mid-December. I think around the 12th or the 14th, maybe it was. And so it took like a month and a half to get this ruling from the High Court. And so, if we look at that timeline, we're talking about, maybe even summer by the time Assange could have a resolution in the UK court system or something like that, which is really insane for somebody in the health that he's in. And of course, he's in a prison that's had COVID outbreaks, and Assange is somebody who is at a heightened risk there. So, this is really important that Assange got this a chance to, make this further appeal. However, it is far short of anything close to him being out of a position where he's going to end up for the rest of his life in a U.S. prison. So that's what's going on in the Assange case. I think, they're appealing on multiple grounds, although from the Kevin Gostola article here, it did sound like the UK High Court did try to limit somewhat what the appeal grounds could be, but I would guess the Supreme Court, although I don't understand the UK justice system as well as the US one, of course, would, have grounds to, whether this appeal is just going to be over if the US guarantee. So that's a big part of this, is that the lower court initially ruled that Assange couldn't be extradited because of the conditions that he would face in American prisons are just so cruel that somebody in Assange's position would likely commit suicide because of the cruelty of the U.S. prisons. And so initially, that's the ruling, and then the High Court overturns that based on the fact that the U.S. then offered guarantees that Assange wouldn't be kept in the worst U.S. prisons with the worst conditions, like the special administration measures, which I broke it down in another show, so I won't get into too much detail here. But and so the High Court said, well, as long as the U.S. offered those guarantees that he won't end up in that position, then he could go ahead and be extradited. And now the Assange team is, I think, appealing on that ground, but I would hope that, they could also extend their appeal to the other original decisions made in the lower and the High Court around Assange's mental health, and also, his status as a journalist and how he shouldn't be able to be extradited for the crime of doing journalism and all that. So a lot of important stuff going on here, and as this progresses to the UK Supreme Court, I'll continue to talk about it on the show. Of course, there's a lot of concerns about Assange's health, and while this is a victory in court for Assange, every day that Assange remains behind bars is a victory for the warmongers, the war state, and the U.S. empire, and so it's really terrible that he's embroiled in this endless justice process at this point, where even if he ends up getting out of prison at the end of this, who knows how long it's going to be, and how much damage is going to be done to him in the time. He already suffered at least some kind of small stroke back in October. So yeah, a lot going on with Assange. Let's move on though and talk about Russia. And here we actually have good news to start with. It's been a while, but here, political advisors to hold four-party talks on Ukraine in Paris. These follow the Normandy format of talks, which of course resulted in the Minsk II ceasefire agreement, which is largely responsible for keeping the violence in eastern Ukraine and the war between the separatists and the Ukrainian government to a minimum. Not that there haven't been people dying there, not that there's not fighting along the line of control fairly frequently, but there's not thousands and thousands of people dying every year because of the ongoing conflict, and part of that was because of the ceasefire reached and kind of what was established through the Minsk II, and these are the talks, the formatted talks that are attempted to be utilized here. So this is some pretty good news that I really haven't seen amplified at all in the U.S. mainstream media. I caught it in one story here from Reuters, but that's essentially it. I haven't seen a lot of other outlets talking about this or promoting this. But this could be absolutely critical in diffusing the tensions. Four-party Normandy format talks mean it's Russia, Ukraine, France, and Germany. And of course, as I talked about in the last show, highlighting the arguments made by Anatol Levin and Joe Loria at Consortium News and at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, that Germany and Russia are two parties, are Germany and France are two parties, to this whole situation. They're members in NATO that, really don't want to go to war with Russia. Germany doesn't even want to sanction the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. They want that Russian liquefied natural gas pouring into their country. And, they're not really concerned about the Ukrainian sovereignty over their own energy prices, right? And that has a huge impact here. And so maybe these talks could achieve something the US can't, and that is some kind of guarantee that Ukraine won't join NATO. Now, I do think Russia would really want to and pursue a deal with the United States, even if they were able to cut something with France or Germany, which I'm guessing is why, at least publicly reported, we haven't seen a lot of attempts for Russia to negotiate directly, maybe with France or with Germany. But this is all very important. One thing I want to correct from the last show, just brain fart kind of issue. I had said a few times Ukrainian Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and of course there is no Chancellor of Ukraine. It's the Chancellor of Germany, and so it just a mistake I had made, and it then got stuck in my brain, so I kept saying it. But I was talking about the German Chancellor. Of course, the president of Ukraine is Zelensky, and the head of that state. So just wanted to take a second to correct that. Now, let's move on, and some more good news, and that is Secretary of State Antony Blinken, as Dave DeCamp writes here, says there are a number of areas where U.S. and Russia can work on security concerns, and he highlighted those areas being arms control, greater transparency, risk reduction, the placement of missile systems, and things of that nature. And so things of that nature could do quite a bit of work and mean something really positive, or it could mean essentially nothing. But the things that he is directly suggesting there, while good and while positive steps, seem to probably fall short of the minimum demands of Russia around Ukraine. So, it seems positive that the Secretary of State is saying that there's room to work, because typically U.S. diplomats are pretty pessimistic about the probability of any kind of success from diplomacy. But Blinken is saying that, there is some room to work, and, maybe it starts with working on those smaller issues, but then eventually the U.S. can come around and agree to something on Ukraine. Now, one of the reasons that I mentioned that maybe related issues could be doing a lot of work is because of how hostile the U.S. establishment and Blob has been on this issue, demanding that Biden do more and be more aggressive. Connor Freeman, the co-host of the show, has a great article out on that today, titled "Cold War Served Hot." You can find it at the Libertarian Institute. We'll be talking about that more on the next episode, but I just think it's important to throw in here that I think one of the things you have to consider when you're looking at the actions of the Americans, and particularly what's being put out publicly right now by the Biden administration, is that you have a bipartisan group of senators who are rabid hawks on this issue. And so if Biden is floating the idea of not allowing NATO, and giving maybe an explicit in writing guarantee to Russia that Ukraine isn't going to join NATO or something like that, if he brings it up now, the hawks are going to go absolutely insane. And while I think that Biden could make the argument to the American people, that's not what the Biden administration is going to do. They're just going to shut it down, because at least the screaming that they're going to hear from the establishment and everything like that will be, no, you have to do more, you can't let Putin get this victory, and everything like that. So it could be that Blinken is actually downplaying the more significant things that the U.S. is willing to talk about, but I don't want to give them just too much credit based on things they haven't done yet either. So always got to try read between the lines and, what's going on, that we hear about versus what's going on behind the scenes. Now, one reason I think it would be very easy for Biden to make the argument to the American people that the Houthis are absolutely wrong and that what we need to do is not back down necessarily, but, make some concessions and make an agreement with Russia over this Ukraine issue to resolve it. There's a polling out this from MSN News. Fewer than 1 in 6 Americans want U.S. soldiers in any Ukraine-Russia war. And of course, polling has proven, in the U.S. to be very off over the past pretty much decade, but, especially like since 2015, 2016. But at the same time, if we're talking about numbers 1 in 6, even if it's drastically off, even if it's off by half and it's actually 1 in 3, those are still numbers that don't win elections if only 33% of Americans want something. And so, of course, if you look at the polling, a greater percentage of Americans, want weapons transfers to Ukraine. They want more sanctions on Russia and things like that. But, I think if Biden was a smarter, more capable president, he could really go out there to the American people and say, look, you don't want us to put troops in Russia. And so the way to resolve this crisis without provoking a conflict in Ukraine that's going to kill a lot of Ukrainians and that we're not going to do anything about, we really can't do anything about, and we won't do anything about once it happens, then we can't put on sanctions, we can't sell weapons to Ukraine because that's only going to provoke a fight. What we can do is we can talk to Russia, we can talk to our partners in Ukraine and come to some kind of deal where Ukraine remains a non-NATO neutral state. So, that's kind of the end of the good news on the Ukraine-Russia business. And now on to the bad news, where the U.S. is very much, even in the Biden administration, trying to make it look like we're at real crisis levels in Ukraine. The staff is begun departing from the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. The U.S. is allowing non-essential staff to leave, and they're also paying for and covering the expenses for them to leave. And so I don't know if you've been a diplomat in Ukraine for a couple of years and you now have an opportunity for a all expense, paid trip to come back to the United States and see some family and all that. That might be a pretty good incentive too. And it's going to lead to a whole lot of people leaving. Also, they're ordering families out of the country. And so, again, if you're a non-essential and you can leave and your family has to leave, then I would guess that a lot of those people will end up leaving. Although, there are people, I'm sure, in the State Department who really maybe believe in their quote-unquote mission and everything like that, and will try to stay to continue to, do work processing visas or anything like that. The U.S. continues to say that they're very concerned that there's going to be a Russia invasion of Ukraine and issued a travel warning for Americans going to Ukraine saying don't go, that they're not going to do a big military evacuation of Ukraine should Russia invade. I'm not exactly sure if it's necessary for the U.S. to be doing all of this, but it does create a narrative that, that there's major concerns that we have. We also have announcements from NATO that more ships and fighter planes will be headed to Eastern Europe, although NATO did not announce any details of this. And so it could not be very many ships or planes, and they could not be going very far into Eastern Europe for all we know. Biden is apparently considering sending more troops to Ukraine. This was reported at the New York Times, I believe, and this report says Biden is not considering sending troops to Ukraine. That is very much not the case. He's said many times he is not doing that. Biden is considering sending more U.S. troops into the Baltics and to Eastern Europe, and he's looking at a number between 1,000 and 5,000 troops. And so if they're putting proposals in front of them, usually I think the president pits, one of the middle ground ones, and so it'll be more than 1,000 and less than 5,000 troops that the U.S. will be deploying somewhere to Eastern Europe. But at the same time, that's not enough to really change anything. I guess, if they're talking about putting some Patriot missile batteries in, some THAAD anti-aircraft, systems, things like that, maybe then we could be talking about deploying things that can maybe make a marginal difference. But they're just talking about like sticking 3,500 infantry into Eastern Europe. This isn't going to make any difference at all, and it's just a token measure and maybe to appease the Huts a little bit. We also have Lloyd Austin announcing that that's the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, announcing that 8,500 U.S. troops are at the heightened preparedness to deploy, which I guess means, if the U.S. really wanted him to, they could put him on a plane tomorrow or in a couple days and send him wherever around the world they need to go. Now, the important things about that I see are the numbers they're talking about are inconsequential to, really what we're talking about for if the U.S. was going to pick a fight with Russia somewhere in Eastern Europe. And so this seems to me to be maybe appeasing Huts, generating some anti-Russia propaganda. Look, all we have to do and what we're doing to try to prevent, Russian aggression and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, this doesn't seem like maybe anything that can't be reversed as far as the U.S.-Russian relationship goes. It's not a significant number of troops, and there's no, I think, tactical significance to it as well. And so while it sounds like this is concerning in a buildup and everything like that, I'm not so sure that this is all that significant, actually, even though it's definitely being portrayed that way in the mainstream media. Now, things that are a little bit more concerning is the Baltic states are sending U.S.-made Stingers and Javelins to Ukraine. The Javelins are anti-armor, anti-tank missiles, and the Stingers are anti-aircraft missiles. These initially came from the U.S., so the U.S. did have to sign off on Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania sending these weapons to Ukraine. Of course, they would be used in any kind of fight against Russia. And so one of my concerns here is that the U.S., we have people in the Senate and things talking about giving Russia a bloody nose, which is silly. They talked about that with Kim Jong-un too. But maybe the Biden administration could calculate that there could be a real blow done to Russia, and Russia could get really embroiled down and spend a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of Russian blood in Ukraine because of how much the U.S. is building up the Ukrainian defenses. Talked on the last show about sending the Mi-17 helicopters. And while I'm not sure how much of a difference this is really going to make, but if the eggheads in Washington think it's going to make a big difference, then, they could miscalculate and think that, the right thing to do is continue to posture because either Russia won't invade because, they'll calculate that it's going to be too deadly for them to do so, or they'll, the Russians will miscalculate, think it'll be easy, go in and wind up in an Afghanistan situation. And so that's part of my concern with all these weapons ending up in the hands of Ukrainians, is that it's going to change the balance, not necessarily on the ground in Ukraine, but in the minds of the people in Washington, D.C. The Department of Homeland Security is warning that Russia could launch a cyber attack against the United States. And after we got this, there was this story in Gizmodo that says, of course, it's labeled hacktivists claim ransomware strike on Belarus railway intended to disrupt Russian forces. And so, of course, what seems to have happened here is, it was a hack by this group. At least they're claiming responsibility. They're called cyber partisans. And, they're labeled here as a hacktivist pro-democracy group, but I'm sure if they had conducted attack against any U.S. railway systems, they would be cyber terrorists, right? And so it's just a matter of propaganda and perspective and everything like that. But understand that while the U.S. always makes a huge deal whenever the Colonial Pipeline is hacked with a ransomware attack, that this is a Russian attack against the United States, even though Russia has actually arrested the members of that group that carried out that ransomware attack. I highly doubt, and I don't know where these people are that this cyber partisans group is, and maybe they're not based anywhere in the West or anything like that, but I doubt the U.S. is going to be very interested in bringing them to justice, even if they were in the West, because, they would label them as like a hacktivist pro-democracy group, and that would be a good thing. I'm also not sure if this group is maybe inflating the success that they had. And it's going to have no impact at all on Russian troop movements or anything like that. But again, the fact that they're claiming this is disrupting Russian troop movements does kind of make it an offensive cyber attack. And if this group is in any way associated with the United States or any Western countries, it wouldn't be absurd, for Russia to interpret this as a cyber attack. And who knows where we go from there. Last story on Russia, and I want to do a little bit more digging on this and what it could actually mean. But the Washington, the people in the United States think it's a big deal that they are threatening to impose sanctions on Russia, and the sanctions would be under the foreign direct products rule. And they say that this was really substantial in hurting Huawei, and so they think it could be really harmful to the Russian economy and really cost them a lot of business and the ability to like import AI and semiconductors and things of that nature that all run off of US scripts and things like that. So I want to find out more about like how this could actually apply to Russia, because applying something to a country is far different than applying it to Huawei. And if it really was as successful against that Chinese telecommunications company as they claim it was. But yeah, I want to do a little bit more digging on that, but the Houthis are really touting that like they have some kind of ace in the hole against Putin, and I highly doubt that's the case. My guess is that Russia has, for quite a few years, kind of come to the conclusion that at any time it could be sanctioned and cut off from the Western economy, and has been preparing for that case that they see as maybe an eventuality that will happen no matter what. And so I don't think Russia would be as concerned about it as the US thinks they are. All right, now let's move on to Yemen, where there's quite a bit going on here. A lot of important news. We had in the past week Saudi Arabia bombed the hub of where the building where the internet, I guess, typically, like the underwater pipeline or cables and everything, I guess they come through the Red Sea into this building that I believe was in Hadada, and Saudi Arabia bombed that. And so for the past 4 or 5 days now, this being recorded on the 24th in the evening, so going back to maybe the 20th or so, there has been no internet in Yemen. Now, immediately when I read that the internet had been knocked out in Yemen, I was very concerned, because typically when we see the internet go out in places like in Myanmar, like in Kashmir, like in Tigray, this means that war crimes are being committed by, the air power or, the overwhelming force. And so that absolutely seems to be either what happened. I guess it could be coincidence. Like, I can't for sure say that Saudi Arabia took out the internet so it could bomb a youth soccer game in a migrant prison, but that's what happened. And it's unclear exactly what the death toll is. As of the recording of this show, I had read about 87 people had confirmed been killed in these two bombings. Again, one being on a youth soccer game and the other one being on a detention facility that apparently held migrants, including minors. So, absolutely horrific crimes being carried out by Saudi airstrikes. A fragment at the site of the prison found that it was a Raytheon-made bomb. Now, maybe northern Yemen is so littered with bombs that, at this point, there's just bomb debris around, or the Houthis have enough like bomb debris that maybe they planted as propaganda or something like that. Certainly just finding the scraps of the bomb at the site don't definitely make it so that that's the bomb that collapsed this, again, detention facility and killed scores of people. But knowing what we know about how Saudi Arabia has used the U.S. made bombs in Yemen, and in cases where they've absolutely been confirmed to have carried out the, used the American made bombs to carry out, say, like the bombing of children, the bombing of funerals, weddings, and things like that, shouldn't be surprised that they used an American made bomb in this case. Now, this, of course, comes after the Houthis, the group that controls northern Yemen, the area that's being bombed by Saudi Arabia, launched an attack that hit a fuel depot and did some damage at an airport, international airport in the UAE last week. And so these are really major attacks being carried out by Saudi Arabia in Yemen right now. The death toll is expected to increase fairly significantly in the attack on the prison in particular, because there are so many wounded, apparently over 200 wounded. And with the medical facilities in Yemen being in short supply prior to this, particularly in northern Yemen, the reports are that all the medical facilities are completely overrun. Now, I have continued. I reached out to a couple people that I communicate with in Yemen and have not heard back from them yet, suggesting that to me the internet is still off. And I've also seen a couple people post in comments on the video where one person sent me a message saying that they were still unable to reach their family who lives in Yemen. And so it does seem like the internet continues to be turned off in Yemen, and that Saudi Arabia is waging a fairly significant bombing campaign on northern Yemen tonight as I record this show. And so expect an update later in the week on Yemen, or maybe next week on kind of the results of what's going on there. And especially after the internet is widely available again in Yemen, that way I could hopefully get some more information on what's going on the ground. We get some more reporting and can really break down what Saudi Arabia is doing to that country. Now, earlier today, there was, this happened on Monday the 24th, the morning of Monday the 24th in, Yemen, UAE, the Arabian Peninsula. There was a ballistic missile attack, or it's reported to be a ballistic missile attack, that was targeting somewhere around Abu Dhabi. That's what was reported, that the UAE and U.S. missile defense systems engaged these missiles. The interesting, I guess, part from CENTCOM is it says U.S. forces at the air base near Abu Dhabi in the UAE engaged 2 inbound missile threats, and says, nobody was hit, but the possibility may be that the U.S. person, this U.S. base was actually the target here, or potentially the U.S. personnel would be interesting, I suppose, and could have real consequences for how much and what the U.S. is willing to do directly in Yemen. Some of the few strikes that have been carried out by the U.S. directly, admitted at least, against the Houthis, were after the Houthis were launching anti-ship missiles into different ships in the Red Sea and the Al-Bab Mendez Strait there. And I think a couple of those missiles landed within a few nautical miles of U.S. ships. And so the U.S. directly bombed Houthi targets in Yemen. So I wonder if this will actually result in some U.S. bombing of Yemen. Now, one interesting thing, I guess, is that the UAE, maybe because the CENTCOM reported that they used the Patriots to intercept these inbound missiles. The UAE also report they use systems, and I read that for the first time, the THAAD interceptor system was used. Now, I guess it could have been used by the UAE in the attack last week that actually where the targets are, where the projectiles hit their targets, but those were cruise missiles and drones, where these I believe were ballistic missiles, which I think are a little bit more what the THAAD system is intended for. just kind of curious as to what happened there if we gain more reporting as to how that system functioned, and if maybe potentially the U.S. also engaged because the UAE were using that system and the Patriot missile system, and at this point, at least against Houthi projectiles, it is a little bit more proven. The UAE is also importing a new air defense system from South Korea. The English name for the system is the M-SAM-2, and they're going to pay $3.4 million for a whole bunch of these systems. Don't know exactly when they're going to arrive in the UAE and everything like that, but the UAE is beefing up their air defense system. And then last story on Yemen is that the U.S. claims that it intercepted a ship in the Gulf of Oman that was smuggling, I believe, 40 tons of urea-based fertilizer, and the claim is that that was going to the Houthis in northern Yemen, and that, you know, urea-based fertilizer can be used in explosives. I guess I don't want to speculate on if that was actually going to be the case or not, just because I don't know a whole lot about fertilizer bombs, and it doesn't seem like a great thing to just kind of talk about on the internet. So I'll leave it up to maybe people who are a little bit more experts on this to hopefully write a paper or something that I could just link to on, if the Houthis could actually effectively use like urea bombs somehow against Saudi Arabia, who's waging an air war against them. I'm not sure that this is something you could load up on ballistic missile. Now, I guess the other thing to mention is that apparently the ship was previously accused by the U.S. of smuggling arms to Yemen, and they had released that ship in the past couple of weeks to the Yemeni Coast Guard. And now maybe there's two Yemeni Coast Guards or something like that, but as far as I'm aware, the Yemeni Coast Guard is controlled by the Houthis, and so I'm not sure, maybe if like this was an entrapment plan by the U.S. where they released this ship back to the Houthis and then left some tracking devices on it and intercepted it again, or what. And the other point I wanted to make on this was just, I think it's very possible to, that this fertilizer was going to be used as fertilizer. There's reports that particularly in northern Yemen, people are going back and doing a lot more farming because of how isolated that country has been from the rest of the world for so long. And so, people going back to farming has actually in some ways alleviated the food crisis in Yemen. And so maybe this is just the sadistic U.S.-Saudi food war against Yemen, where we're going to deprive them of fertilizer, and they're really in no way concerned about this being used as a weapon. All right, let's move on to Afghanistan, where the humanitarian situation continues to be a disaster. The UN is screaming about it, saying we got to do something. They're trying to put together like a $5 billion, the largest fund ever, to help the people of Afghanistan make it through this winter. They're continuing to say that it's going to be millions of Afghans who, are at risk for starvation this winter. And of course, when we're talking about millions of people at risk for starving, we're talking about, the youngest or the oldest, the absolutely most vulnerable, the children under 5 or so, who are really at risk of dropping dead in mass numbers in Afghanistan this winter. And so that's the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan right now, as the Taliban are trying to get some talks to happen. Previously, they had proposed a prisoner swap with the United States. And, while the Taliban may be asking for somebody who isn't a great character, the U.S. war in Afghanistan is over. And so one of the ways to really start to put this war behind us is to make sure all the American captives are out of Afghanistan. And if the U.S. could swap some Afghan prisoners for them, that seems like, kind of what should happen at the end of a war. And so, it's part of this complicated thing where the U.S. has all along not treated this as an actual war, and has, kind of tried to claim that, these are people who are criminals, but they actually don't apply them to the criminal code and everything like that. Although I believe the person that the Taliban are asking for here is actually in the U.S. prison system. But, Same time, this is a war, and so at the end of war, you release the POWs, and this could be a way to bring about a resolution for the war. Now, there are talks going on between the Taliban and Western governments right now in Oslo. These are the first direct talks between the U.S. and the Taliban and Western governments since the fall of Kabul and the Taliban taking over that country. The U.S. is represented here by Tom West, who replaced Ahmed Khalilzad as the U.S. envoy to Afghanistan. And I mean, as far as I could tell at this point, it doesn't seem like there's been any announcement of success coming from these talks. They're going to continue for 3 days. They started on Sunday, so they'll go through Tuesday of this week. The Taliban are continuing to look for access to the Afghan government accounts and, relieving of sanctions and all of that, which the U.S. so far seems unwilling to offer. There's another diplomatic issue that the Taliban are having, and that is what to do with all the Afghan government embassies around the world. And now the Taliban are trying to insert their officials into some of these embassies. It says that there are 65 Afghan government missions around the world. Most of them continue to be run by the officials of the now defunct Afghan government. And so they're actually keeping the Taliban from assuming these posts. And while I guess, some people might not want Taliban envoys in their countries and things like that, and that could maybe on some level be understandable, I would guess it'd be a good thing for potential diplomacy and negotiations with the Taliban to make sure that these are happening, that the at least some of the embassies are staffed by the Taliban. Even North Korea maintains embassies in I think Sweden has an embassy in North Korea, and these are ways for the US to even relay messages to the Korean government. So the Taliban setting up some embassies and taking over some of these posts may not be a bad thing, even though again, not that the Taliban are great people or anything like that. The U.S. did promise some aid to Afghanistan, $308 million, nowhere to what's absolutely needed for the Afghan people, but it is a token amount of something, and they're going to get them some COVID vaccines. Unfortunately, what the Afghan people really need is for the U.S. to unfreeze the funds, and that's exactly what we're hearing from the UN as well, saying that this is what is needed to prevent the Afghans who are facing starvation from starving to death. And again, as I talked about on a recent show with Henry Hankerson, who is great military vet and everything like that, talking about how even though Biden withdrew from Afghanistan, that the situation that we now have in Afghanistan could kill more people than the war did. Just absolutely insane. A couple things going on the ground in Afghanistan. I believe I mentioned this on the show a couple times, but more in relation to other things. And just wanted to make sure I nailed it down on an Afghan segment. And as a senior member of the Pakistani Taliban was assassinated in Afghanistan, I believe the assassination happened in the Nangarhar province, which is where ISIS-K operates most freely in Afghanistan. At least as far as my knowledge, that's still the case, even though the Taliban have taken over the country now from the U.S. government. That's still mostly where the ISIS-K hangs out, and ISIS-K is former members of the Pakistani Taliban, the Trinki-Taliban. And so I guess, maybe there's some kind of factional feud going on that I don't understand. Maybe this is an example of the Trinki Taliban or ISIS-K seeing this guy as a potential problem or something like that, and it being just an assassination of one of their own members. Or hell, it could be the Taliban who carried out the assassination in an effort to appease the Pakistani government, which is currently at war with the TET after they broke their ceasefire with the Pakistani government in the past month or so. There's also been some fighting in Afghanistan. 4 people killed in fighting between the Taliban and the Uzbeks. This is an ethnic minority group in the north of the country. And this happened in the middle of January, so about 10 days ago. And I haven't read about continued fighting or, more people trying to rally to the Uzbek cause. And so hopefully this is a sign of a growing sectarian war or anything in Afghanistan was just more of a one-off thing between like maybe a small militia faction, the Taliban or something like that. The Islamic State continues to carry out attacks in Afghanistan. The latest one was in Herat, and 6 people died when the ISKP put a bomb on a minibus. So that's the news I have on Afghanistan. Of course, again, the biggest thing that needs to happen is for the U.S. to unfreeze those accounts and allow the Taliban to operate as a government that can import things for its citizens and feed the people who are completely deprived when the U.S. popped the massive aid bubble that it had set up in Afghanistan. Last thing I'm talking about today is some news coming out of the Pentagon, and maybe the biggest and most interesting story is what's happening with some former Trump administration Pentagon officials who are now signing agreements and joining the boards of these smaller tech firms. And so there's some statements in here from people who follow the placement on these boards and everything. And it's not like a critical take on this or anything like that, but they're just explaining that one of the reasons that these former military people are former Pentagon staffers and everything are joining these smaller tech firms is because it gives them a lot of power in these tech firms. If you go and you're, a senior or not a senior, an undersecretary of state or something like that, and you join the board of Raytheon, it's probably more of a token position and just, so you could call up your buddy who still works at the Pentagon and try to get them to buy Lockheed products versus if you're on the board of one of these small companies, they're really going to look for you to guide the company and what the company does. And so it highlights Ryan McCarthy, who was, I believe, the Undersecretary of State and the Army Secretary. And he has joined the board of Tomahawk Robotics and is steering that company, but then also joined the board of Scout Ventures, which is the parent company of Tomahawk Robotics, and has joined the Austin, Texas-based tech company StriveWorks, and then the board of the more traditional defense contractor CI. Mark Esper, the former Secretary of Defense, along with James Hundo Goots, has joined the board of Espis or Apyrus, and this is another tech company. And I believe Gutis was a former undersecretary who was involved in acquisitions. Will Roper, a former Pentagon official, has joined Volason. And then Ellen Lord has joined Voyage Space Holdings. And, these are just a few examples of people outlined in this article, but this is an overall trend that's happening. And, one of the bigger things that could happen here, of course, is that all these companies, of course, do more business with the Pentagon and exploit the ties of all these former Pentagon officials. But also all these tech companies are going to be steered towards the massive Pentagon honeypot, and they're no longer going to be designing technologies that, make me and you and our lives easier and better and everything like that, but rather just, making technologies that help the Pentagon kill people and, earning themselves Pentagon contracts and Pentagon money, which, really doesn't translate to anything productive. The U.S. and Israel are testing the Arrow 3 missile defense system. This is a joint missile defense system project. And the idea is that these Arrow 3 missiles would hit their targets so high in the atmosphere, it would reduce the amount of debris that could come down and potentially kill people. Another potential use, though, is because it fires so high, or these could be anti-satellite weapons. And of course, the U.S. has talked about potentially having to deal with Russia against the anti-satellite weapons. I think China included in that too. On space war, gotta talk about here. NATO is saying that an attack in space could trigger war with the alliance, essentially saying a potential attack like on a German defense satellite could trigger Article 5 and it be treated as an attack, say, like, you know, on a German military base or something like that, collective defense or going to war. And while you know, maybe an attack on like a German satellite would be a pretty clear example of an offensive military attack. Say it's not, you know, so obvious if Russia, you know, claims that they're carrying out a test and they hit one of their own satellites and the debris from that satellite takes out, you know, 4 or 5 other satellites or something like that, including a German defense satellite, then is Germany going to claim that that was an intentional attack or something like that and try to invoke Article 5? You know, I think that that's something that we have to possibly consider when we're saying that an attack in space is going to provoke Article 5. It's not always just as clear as, you know, they like to make it sound. The Pentagon's awarding some contracts. $32 million is going to Geosat to produce some sensors and prototypes for space-based sensors. Not exactly sure of what all this is going to be yet, but you know, the Space Force is handing out money. The Pentagon is going to spend $52 million in 2022 on blimps that have a bunch of spy technology in them to surveil the southern border. The Red Hills fuel tanks that are in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I've been talking about on the show for several months now because fuel is leaking from those tanks, poisoning the drinking water of you know, the people who live around these fuel tanks, which is mainly like the families and U.S. sailors and everything like that. And so the Navy has now said that an operator error caused the fuel spills, and that they're going to, I think, close a couple of these tanks, not the whole facility, but a couple of tanks. I'm going to continue to follow this and see what the Navy actually does. They're talking about this now because all the big Hawaiian, you know, national level politicians, their congressmen, their senators are involved in everything, and they're saying they're going to address this problem, but bureaucracy words, they're probably going to drag their feet and then not do anything about it, refill the tanks and say that they fixed the problem when maybe they really haven't. So talking about the USS Carl Vinson, this is a U.S. aircraft carrier that's been carrying out some operations in the South China Sea. It was carrying out operations with the USS Essex around the Paracel Islands that are claimed by China in the South China Sea, and now it's back in the South China Sea, carrying out operations with the other U.S. aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln. So, you know, there's 2 aircraft carrier strike groups right now in the South China Sea. And of course, that's intimidating and very provocative towards China. But one thing that we have to note is one of these aircraft carriers is suffering a lot of mishaps. In the past 2 months, the Carl Vinson has suffered, I believe now, 5 Class A mishaps. Those are ones that cause over $2.5 million in damage. Although it being a Class A mishap, that is the upper level, and so it's 2.5 million or more. I'm guessing more could mean 10, 15, 20 million dollars or more. And so there were 4 of them right near the end of the year, and then just today 7 sailors were injured after a landing incident with an F-35 on the deck of the ship. Not exactly clear what happened. It was a F-35C, and 7 people were injured. I believe 4 were medevac off the ship, and most of them are reported to be doing fairly well. So it doesn't seem like it's going to kill anybody or anything like that. But, likely caused a lot of money worth of damage. The pilot had to eject from the plane, so not sure exactly what happened to the plane. But if it was landing and had a mishap, it could have been like lost to the sea or something like that. These are, multi-million-dollar equipment, or it could have sustained a lot of damage. So this could be in part because of maybe people not doing a very good job or something like that. Maybe there's a lack of equipment, replacement parts and everything. And so the pilots aren't getting as much training time as they should. And so they're making mistakes that they normally wouldn't if they got as much training time as they should. Remember, towards the end of Obama's administration, 2015, 2016, the 7th Fleet, Indo-PACOM, the area of the world we're talking about here, had several incidents. The USS McCain, the USS Fitzgerald, running into other ships, this resulting in dead sailors, dead civilians. And so it wouldn't be unheard of if there are, operations in this part of the world that are happening where there's, not enough equipment and, things aren't being done right. And people are going to start dying and, accidents are already piling up because of it. Really have to wonder if there are that many accidents happening on that ship, if what we need to be doing is sending it constantly on these deployments to the South China Sea. 2 more stories here before we wrap up. The Tennessee National Guard is deploying some soldiers, I think 20 or 25 in total. 75 soldiers to Kuwait, and then the Washington National Guard is deploying 100 soldiers to Poland. And so, this is at a time where a lot of National Guards are being used in the United States for COVID and all this other stuff, supply chain issues. And the U.S. military continues to co-opt them, take them and put them in places overseas to do God knows what. What was 100 National Guardsmen going to do in Poland if Russia invaded that, a completely insignificant and inconsequential number of troops? Maybe they're a tripwire. We could say more Americans died, and that would provoke more calls to go to war and everything like that. But, these are actual people who could be doing actual things in the United States. Not that I'm the biggest fan of deploying the National Guard for everything, but if the U.S. government's making it impossible for, people to work in nursing homes and things like that, and better to have the National Guard there, I guess, than, people die of neglect and everything because there's no staff for the nursing homes. So continuing to deploy them overseas seems absolutely pointless. All right, that's where I'll wrap the show for today. Hope everybody is continuing to enjoy it. I may put out another bonus show this week just because, a ton of things that I want to get through and cover. Of course, I got an episode coming up tomorrow night, probably Wednesday morning. It'll be out with co-host Connor Freeman, and then plans to talk to friends of the show, Patrick McFarland and Joanne Leone, later in the week. So lots of great content coming up. Make sure you're subscribed to the show somewhere. A great place to go is the Libertarian Institute to get everything I put out. We put the show on the blog at antiwar.com, and be sure to check out the viewpoints there. That's what I put together. And then YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey for video version of the show. Continue to support, and thank you so much, everybody who's putting the show out there to more people. It is really helping and making a difference, and part of the reason why I'm putting out all these bonus shows. So catch you tomorrow with another show.